This is background on United Way. I think folks have hopefully heard of United Way, but if not, we're the largest nonprofit, frankly, in the world. But we are hyper-local in our focus. So each United Way is independent and focuses in local communities. Here in Chicago, we serve all of Cook, all of DuPage, and portions of the collar communities, all with the focus on how do we look not just across our full region, but actually hyper-local in the neighborhood. We work with nearly 200 partners to do that, and nearly 1,000 corporations in that effort. One of the things, though, that I do want to share is you keep in mind, because I think it's important as we think about this process, is we generate a lot of dollars. So we raise on average about $50 million a year. And a lot of times people hear that and they think, oh, there's a lot of big individuals or companies writing big checks. Our average donor is $2 a week. And when you think about that, in order to have the kind of change we talk about, it's not going to come from just dollars. Dollars are absolutely important, but it's going to come from people who have their full engagement, because it has to be public and private. It has to be the way people vote. It has to be all of these other components. And so if someone just writes a check, that's great, we'll take the check, but it doesn't get us to the kind of action that are needed, that if you can create a force of people who are willing to be a part of that work. And so as you think about this, and as you look at kind of the ways we're trying to do some of this work, we look at it very much from everyone has a role to play, regardless of where they sit, and how do we find ways for them to plug into that work. But has anyone here heard Raj Chetty speak before? At least a couple hands go up. So he was in Chicago about a week and a half ago at the MPC luncheon. He's a researcher who's now at Harvard, who has looked at economic outcomes based on the zip code that you're born. So a lot of folks have heard, the mayor and others have said zip code shouldn't determine your destiny, but in our community it does. Well, his data set is the proof of that statement. What you see here is a data set that shows kids born between 1978 and 1983, the zip code that they were born into, and where they are economically 35 years later. This particular data set is for males, and it looks at low-income families. So think about someone who was born into a family earning about $20,000 to $25,000 in 1978, and where are they today? The dark red means that those families, or that individual and their household, is now making less than $10,000. So they started at $20,000, and 35 years later, $10,000. It does not matter where they move in this case. It's just based on where they were born, they show up. So they might not be here today, they might be somewhere else, but their income is $10,000. Those in the blue and green area are folks that are making $50,000, $60,000, and $75,000. So again, being born in a different zip code in the same exact city has these huge discrepancies in terms of outcomes. One of the things that Chetty shared when he was here a couple weeks ago is that Chicago owns the largest difference between white male outcomes and African American male outcomes in the country. So what it means is, being born poor and African American, you have a way larger gap than anywhere else in the country as a poor white male in terms of economic earnings 35 years later. So when the mayor and others say zip code shouldn't determine your destiny, right now our data is telling us that it does. We also know that if you move, the earlier you move out of one of these zip codes, the less impact that that zip code has. So if you moved at age 2, you get almost all the benefits of being born out in this blue area. If you moved, though, at age 18, you get none of the benefit. So every 2 to 3 years, the amount of benefit changes. And so one of the conversations that has come up is, well, should we be moving everyone? Sure, you can have that conversation. I don't know how we're going to move 500,000 people, let alone the fact that that destroys culture, families, and neighborhoods. So what we've talked about is to say everyone should have the opportunity to go wherever they want. That is a choice that you should have. But how do you instead talk about changing neighborhoods so that outcomes are similar across geographies, and it's not just the zip code lottery that we have today? So the second chart is to say, in real time, well, what is your life expectancy? So if you're not moved by the fact that economic earnings are significantly different, should we be moved by life expectancy? And to see that 3, 4, 5 miles can have a profound impact on how long you're going to live just doesn't sit with anyone, right? It doesn't seem like that should be the way we do things. And then this last one that we use is, so for folks that are not compelled by the economics and folks that are not compelled by life expectancy, hopefully will be compelled by self-interest. And the self-interest in this case is the fact that right now, Chicago and Illinois, as we know, is losing population. And we are disproportionately losing population from families that are in the zip codes that we just talked about. Because rationally speaking, if you're in that situation, you have the opportunity to leave, you're likely to do so. Even though every time we are in neighborhood, and I know you all have had the opportunity to go across the west side, if you talk to families, they want to be there. It's not that they're looking to leave, but if you're having to export your children to go to school, if you're facing the kind of challenges and you're not seeing change take place in your community, people are choosing to go other places, but there are a lot of things that we can do to begin to change that. So one that we use here is to talk about, there's a growing body of research that shows that place can transform if you make the right investments. So David Brooks in the New York Times has written a number of articles over the last year about what has happened in Canada, as well as other parts of the country here in the US, when people have come together at the community level, at the neighborhood level, to really focus resources to change outcomes. You know, likewise, you've had all kinds of local information, in part because this is one of the central tenets of the mayor's campaign. The model that we use, and the model that's been used in other parts of the country that we've really started to drill down on, is one that looks like this. It starts with a defined neighborhood. The reality is, to say we're going to do this all across Chicago gets too complicated and quickly falls on the weight of itself. But to say we're going to work in partnership with residents in a portion of Austin, which is what Darnell's doing, in a portion of Bronzeville, in a portion of you name the neighborhood, and you really define the geography that we're talking about. Then it incorporates all of these issues. So for those who can't see on the screen here, it talks about affordable housing, cradle to career education, family wraparound services, all the things that help keep a family stable, economic development and business ownership. We make a neighborhood a place you actually want to be in, and then arts and culture. Often in social services, and for those of you who are in the nonprofit sector, you've probably experienced this, we talk about one issue. We say, hey, I'm an education person. Great, we should be. I'm a workforce person, looking at my friend over here. You know, we are, and yet people don't view that. You know, you don't live your life saying, a good thing I have this education, I'm not going to worry about where I live. It's a good thing I have this stable home, I'm not going to worry about the education around me. So in Chicago, we have this great advantage of having a really dynamic LISC entity that has created these quality of life plans through a robust process. When Darnell talked about the process that they used in that video, it was a LISC quality of life plan in which they really look comprehensively on what is it that our neighborhood wants? What are the resources we want to bring in? What are the assets that we have to build off of? And how can we really put this together so that you have that concrete plan? And then we think it's critically important to have a community quarterback. We can have all the plans all day long, but if somebody's not waking up every single day thinking about the work and saying, I'm going to do something about it and working to keep it moving, it becomes a thing that's on the shelf. And how many times in your businesses and your organizations do you have a great plan, but nobody's driving it, right? That's the opportunity. That's what Darnell and others are doing every single day. So, you know, this is a little bit about why neighborhood. So a lot of this neighborhood-based work, I mean, it's been in existence for a long time, but when it began to be codified into an actual approach, started actually in Atlanta, in the Eastlake community in the late 90s, when folks really started researching it. So this effort called Purpose-Built Communities is now operating in about 35 different places. What they have, and I actually grew up or went to high school in Atlanta during this time period, you know, the community that was discussed there had for Atlanta all the, you know, the markings of high crime, it had low unemployment, low educational attainment, and today it's a very different place. Now there's a lot of kind of reasons for that. Some of them have been great, some of them not so great, but they have had a transformative experience and learned a lot through that process. So now this type of effort has taken place in communities across the country, and so there's a whole lot more learnings that we and others have been able to apply, but it's still an ongoing piece of work, and so it's really important for us. When we started this work, there were a bunch of partners who did work alongside each other. You know, what I often describe, if anyone have kids, young kids, you know, there's the concept of parallel play, where you're playing in the sandbox next to another child, you're not interacting with them, but you're playing with the same toy. Now, I don't want to diminish any of our work, we all do really important work, but that's what is happening often in communities, that we all might be working on workforce issues, but we're doing it in our own way, in our own place, even though we're in the same sandbox. What has happened over the course of the first 4 or 5 years of this effort is groups have now come together to work in partnership, and new efforts have really spun out. Again, thinking of, it's not enough to have a workforce program and mentoring programs. We have to have the vibrancy of neighborhoods and the kind of investments, and what's been great is these coalitions have created the investment opportunities. Now it's a question of, can we bring those resources to the table? So this just gives you a little bit more of kind of the detail of kind of where it started, kind of where we are today. One of the things that we're really proud of in it is we've been able to bring a lot of resources to the table. So, United Way raises lots of different money, but MacArthur Foundation and others have co-invested around this work. The McCormick Foundation has co-invested around this work. We're starting to see individual donors co-invest around this work. Those are important. Those are still the philanthropic side of it. And for those that are in companies, your philanthropic budget is really important. It's something you care about. It's also a very small portion of your overall budget. To be able to change the flow of resources, we have to start thinking about the economic development side. And the example I'll give there, and folks might have seen this report, it was written up in Cranes, that about 90% or so of public spend in our community is spent on the south and west sides in Chicago. And something in the order of 90% or 95% of private investment, commercial investment, is spent on the north side of the city of Chicago. Now that sounds like, all right, well, we're about equal, except for the fact that the private investment is 5x the public investment. So when we think about what it takes, we have all kinds of discussions, and Matt and others who work in the public sector, we need to keep pressuring them to do the right things. That's important. But we're playing with 1/5, 1/6 of the opportunity if we're just saying we're not going to even consider the economic development side. And so that's really what this next stage. And so we put out recently, we think it's going to be $1 billion over the next 10 years to do this in really 3 to 5 neighborhoods. We're not even talking about across the region, but $1 billion of investment. Now, philanthropically, that's probably about $250 million of it. That's to do the things that help stabilize family. That's to provide the kind of the safe capital, if you will, that can be lost in the types of investment that needs to be made. But the rest of it has to be private. That can be hiring, that can be tax credits, that can be business investments and commercial investments in commercial corridors, but that has to take place. Otherwise, we're going to continue to try to program our way out of this, and we're going to struggle with it. Like, we'll make incremental changes, but to fundamentally transform, we need to be able to shift from that 5x being spent in one part of the community and help move some of it in ways that return money. We're not saying to do this from charity. We're saying to do this for economic returns, but to do this in such a way that brings those resources across our community to help really build up neighborhoods that have become vacant in many cases. And that means putting the decision-making power in the communities themselves.